You can't park here. This lot's for courthouse staff only. I'm going to need you to move along.
I appreciate the concern, officer. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Let's see some credentials then.
Of course. Judge Malcolm Hayes, County Superior Court.
Really? That's so? Look, I don't have time for games. Move your vehicle.
It's not a game. My court session starts in 10 minutes, and this is my assigned spot.
The SUV approached the courthouse parking lot like any other vehicle would on a quiet morning. But as soon as its headlights cut across the asphalt, Officer Brandon Cole stiffened, planting his boots firmly and raising a hand sharply. "Morning. You can't park here. This lot's for courthouse staff only," he barked. The driver didn't react with anger or surprise. He simply looked up, calm and composed. "I appreciate the concern, officer. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. Brandon's eyes narrowed. Something about the man made him instantly suspicious. He didn't recognize the face, the car, or the subtle authority in the driver's posture. To Brandon, this was a problem that needed to be stopped before it even started. Before we continue, I want to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Because what happens next is the kind of morning confrontation you won't believe until you read it all. The driver, Judge Malcolm Hayes, rolled down his window slowly. He was dressed in a dark coat, not his robe, but the calm certainty in his movements radiated experience. "This is my parking spot. I work here," he said plainly. Brandon, however, ignored him, folding his arms. "Yeah, sure. Let's see some credentials," he snapped. Hayes reached into his coat pocket and produced a government-issued courthouse ID, holding it out carefully. Brandon leaned in, stepping too close to the SUV, squinting as if the ID might vanish if he didn't scrutinize it personally. "Sir, there's no need to get that close," Hayes said, his voice even and low. "I'm handing you the identification." But Brandon's suspicion ran deeper than any paperwork. "Not this morning, you don't. Step out of the vehicle," he demanded. "For what reason?" Hayes asked, keeping his hands visible, one on the wheel, one still holding his ID. "To verify who you are," Brandon replied curtly. Hayes didn't flinch. "I am not stepping out unless you give me a lawful reason," he said. The officer's jaw tightened. He was no longer enforcing rules. He was enforcing an idea, a prejudice, a narrative he had already written in his mind. "You people always." Brandon caught himself mid-sentence, but the thought lingered, heavy and obvious. The calm of the lot seemed to stretch on forever. Brandon stood firm, blocking the only entrance, convinced that control meant authority. Hayes waited silently, letting the tension build without aggression. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the nearly empty lot. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant sound of tires on pavement. Hayes spoke again, his tone measured. "Officer Cole, I work in this building. I have reserved parking. This ID proves it." Brandon waved dismissively, not even glancing at the badge. "Anyone can print that." "Move along," he said. Hayes's expression hardened slightly. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was willful refusal. "You are making a serious mistake," he said, voice firm now, piercing through Brandon's stubborn posture. Minutes ticked by. The officer's hand hovered near his radio, his ego inflating with imagined authority. Hayes sat patiently, watching him, calculating, waiting for reason to find its way through. And then, the quiet tension of the morning shifted again. A courthouse clerk, Alina Brooks, appeared from behind the side entrance. She had arrived early, keys jingling, noticing the unusual scene. "Officer Cole, everything okay?" she asked cautiously. "I've got it under control," he said quickly, not meeting her eyes. But Alina's attention was drawn past him, to the SUV. Her eyes widened. "Is that?" Brandon spun sharply. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Keep moving." But Alina stepped closer, peering through the glass. "Wait, that's Judge Hayes," she exclaimed. Brandon waved her off again, but the words had been said. The truth was now hovering in the air like a storm ready to break. Hayes's gaze remained calm, but piercing. Officer Cole, in exactly 1 minute, you're going to wish you had handled this differently, he said, voice steady and quiet. Brandon smirked, still clinging to the illusion of control. Yeah, we'll see about that, he replied. He had no idea that what was coming next would collapse everything he thought he knew about authority. Another vehicle turned into the staff lot. A silver sedan, driven by Lieutenant Mark Reynolds, a senior security supervisor. Brandon's posture shifted slightly as Reynolds approached. Morning. Why is the gate still down? The lieutenant asked, his tone casual but firm. Brandon puffed up. Unidentified male attempting to enter restricted property. Claims he works here. ID looks suspicious. Reynolds looked past Brandon and into the SUV. Recognition hit immediately. Morning, Judge Hayes, he said, nodding respectfully. Brandon froze. Hayes nodded back calmly. Reynolds turned to Brandon, disappointment clear. Why didn't he let him in? He refused instructions, Brandon muttered. Reynolds's glare sharpened. He's the chief judge of this courthouse. The highest-ranking official here. What exactly did he refuse? Brandon had no answer. Reynolds reached for the ID, glanced at it once, and handed it back to Hayes. Apologies, Your Honor. This should never have happened. Hayes accepted it calmly, without a trace of anger, only composed authority. Brandon's earlier smirk had vanished. His assumptions, his imagined control, everything he had relied on to justify stopping the judge, dissolved in an instant. The lieutenant addressed Brandon with quiet but cutting precision. Protocol requires verifying IDs, checking names, treating staff with respect. Did you do any of that? Brandon shook his head faintly. I thought. You assumed? Reynolds interrupted, voice low and sharp. And assumptions almost created a major incident. Hayes watched silently, his presence alone a reminder of the power of calm, deliberate authority. Alina, standing nearby, nodded, realizing the gravity of the moment. Brandon's shoulders slumped. Every instinct he had relied on, ego, suspicion, bias, was now useless. He felt the weight of a lesson coming, one he would not forget. The gate lifted silently under Reynolds's control. Your Honor, your parking spot is open, he said. Hayes didn't move immediately. He looked at Brandon, eyes steady and calm. Officer Cole, I asked you to verify my ID multiple times. You refused. You were seconds from escalating a situation unnecessarily. Brandon nodded weakly, unable to speak. Hayes finally rolled forward slowly, passing Brandon, moving with quiet authority. Reynolds leaned close to the officer. You'll be reporting to my office as soon as the judge settles in. Brandon's stomach sank. The day was only beginning, and the consequences were already clear. Inside, the courthouse hummed with the calm rhythm of early morning activity. Hayes moved to his chambers, already reviewing the docket, unbothered by the storm outside. Brandon, on the other hand, followed Reynolds reluctantly, every step heavy with the realization that authority without fairness was meaningless. He was about to learn that accountability always finds its moment, and mornings like this are unforgettable. Brandon's steps echoed on the polished floor of the courthouse as Reynolds led him toward a small office near the security desk. Each footfall felt heavier than the last. The morning sunlight streaming through the large windows only seemed to highlight the weight of his mistake. He tried to steady his breathing, but his chest was tight. This wasn't just a reprimand waiting. It was a confrontation with reality, one he had dodged for too long. Once inside, Reynolds gestured toward a chair. Brandon sat stiffly, hands gripping the edges. The lieutenant closed the door behind him, and silence filled the room. It wasn't loud, but it was firm, like the calm before a storm. Cole, Reynolds began, his voice low but carrying authority, explain to me exactly what happened outside. Brandon swallowed. I stopped him because... He didn't. I didn't recognize him, sir, he stammered. Words felt inadequate. Reynolds leaned back, gaze unwavering. You didn't recognize him, or you didn't want to recognize him? He asked slowly, letting each word land. Brandon flinched slightly. He could feel the weight in the room, the accountability that no badge could protect him from. I thought. He started again, but Reynolds cut him off. Cole, you assumed. You assumed your perception was enough to dictate action, and that assumption nearly caused a major incident. Understand that? Yes, sir, Brandon whispered, his voice barely audible. The reality was sinking in. All his confidence, all his ego, evaporated. Reynolds didn't speak immediately. He let the silence press down, giving Brandon space to absorb the truth. You are required to review all security procedures, undergo additional bias training, and write a full report explaining why protocol was ignored. This isn't optional. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Brandon repeated, his voice steadier now, though still filled with unease. Good, Reynolds said, leaning forward slightly. Authority isn't measured by how much force you can project, Cole. It's measured by professionalism and procedure. You let bias dictate your decision. That destroys trust. That puts people at risk. That nearly caused chaos in this building. Brandon nodded, shame settling like a heavy weight on his shoulders. He thought about Judge Hayes's calm, controlled demeanor, how he had never raised his voice, yet completely commanded the situation. That calm authority had been far more powerful than any uniform or badge. He could feel the lesson being etched into him. Each word Reynolds spoke carving deeper into his understanding. Reynolds paused, letting Brandon reflect before continuing. I need you to tell me, honestly, why you refused to verify the ID when it was offered multiple times. Brandon's throat tightened. I thought I could tell who belonged here by looking. I thought I knew. But I was wrong. Reynolds's gaze hardened slightly. You assumed you knew. You didn't check, you didn't follow procedure, and you let bias rule your judgment. That is the definition of negligence in this role. Do you understand the difference between assumption and verification? Yes, sir, Brandon replied, the words heavier than ever. The lieutenant leaned back, studying him. Cole, this isn't about shaming you in front of your colleagues. It's about ensuring that this situation never happens again. Your actions could have escalated. Judge Hayes could have interpreted your refusal as confrontation. This was avoidable. Yet here you are, realizing consequences you almost caused. Brandon swallowed hard. He wanted to explain, to defend himself, but there was no defense. Only accountability. He realized that every officer's credibility rested on their ability to follow rules, treat every individual fairly, and remove bias from decision-making. That morning, he had failed on all counts. Reynolds leaned forward again, voice softening slightly. Mornings like that test you, Cole. They reveal what's in your heart. The law and proper procedure don't bend to perception or prejudice. If you cannot enforce protocol without bias, you are a danger not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. Understand? Brandon nodded, the reality sinking in deeper with each moment. Yes, sir. I understand. Good, Reynolds said firmly. Now, after you finish your report and training, I want you to reflect on this incident. Think about how your assumptions affected someone else, how easily this could have escalated. Judge Hayes didn't yell. He didn't make threats. He simply stood his ground, followed protocol, and expected the same from you. That's authority, Cole, not intimidation. Brandon nodded again, feeling the weight of his misjudgment. The officer who had entered the courthouse parking lot confident in his assumptions was no longer the man sitting here. He was quiet, reflective, aware of the fragility of authority when unearned. Reynolds stood and gestured toward the door. You'll also need to meet with Judge Hayes. Not for punishment, but for understanding. His presence alone is a reminder of what professionalism looks like. Take this seriously. This is part of your accountability." "Yes, sir," Brandon whispered, barely lifting his gaze. The lieutenant left the office, leaving Brandon to sit in silence. The sounds of the courthouse continued outside. Footsteps, ringing phones, the low hum of conversations. But in that moment, Brandon felt isolated in his own thoughts. The confrontation had been brief, but its lessons were enormous. Every assumption, every bias, every unchecked decision had a consequence, and he was facing it head-on. Minutes later, a clerk approached, quiet but cautious. "Officer Cole," she said. Brandon looked up slowly. "Yes. It's Judge Hayes. He's willing to meet, but—" her voice faltered slightly. "He wants you to understand fully what happened, and why it was dangerous." Brandon nodded, swallowing. The moment he had feared had arrived. He followed the clerk to the judge's chambers, heart pounding, palms sweaty. The door opened, and Judge Hayes looked up from his desk. Calm, measured, commanding. Not a trace of anger, only the quiet authority that had characterized him throughout the morning. "Officer Cole," Hayes said simply, motioning to a chair. "Sit." Brandon did, rigidly, unsure what to say. Hayes leaned back slightly. "I know mornings can be stressful, but the law and proper procedure don't change based on perception or bias. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brandon whispered, voice shaking slightly. Hayes nodded, not unkindly. "Good. I want you to leave this office not because you are afraid, but because you understand. Authority without fairness is meaningless. Respect and procedure are not optional, they are mandatory. Do you understand?" Brandon nodded again, the weight of every word settling in his chest. This was more than a lesson. It was a reckoning. Every glance at a badge, every interaction with the public or staff, would now carry the memory of that morning. He rose slowly, stepping out of the chambers. The hallways of the courthouse felt different now. He felt smaller, humbled, aware of how easily mistakes could escalate. How fragile authority could be without fairness. Judge Hayes returned to his work, calm as ever, a quiet testament to professionalism. Outside the chambers, Brandon exhaled slowly. The morning confrontation had passed, but its lessons would not leave him. Every procedure, every rule, every interaction would now carry the weight of accountability. He had been forced to confront not just a professional mistake, but a personal one. How assumptions could blind him to reality and put others at risk. For the first time that morning, Brandon understood, and he would never forget. Brandon walked down the hallway toward the security office, the weight of the morning pressing on him with every step. The polished floors reflected his reflection like a mirror, stiff shoulders, downcast eyes, and a sense of guilt heavier than any uniform or badge could conceal. He had faced the lieutenant, faced the judge, and now faced himself. Each step reminded him that assumptions could unravel careers, relationships, and trust faster than anyone imagined. By the time he reached the security office, his colleagues were starting to arrive for their shifts. The hum of printers, the low murmur of radios, and the clattering of keys filled the room. Brandon felt exposed in the open space, a stark contrast to the isolation of the lieutenant's office. Some officers gave him cautious glances, aware something significant had occurred, while others were oblivious, absorbed in routine. Brandon cleared his throat and began reviewing the gate procedures. One by one, he scanned IDs, checked names, confirmed parking permissions. Each step was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if repeating them would cleanse him of the morning's misjudgment. He paused after each verification, remembering Judge Hayes's calm, unwavering gaze, the controlled patience that had made the officer's arrogance collapse. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. Alina Brooks, the early arriving clerk, peeked in cautiously. "Officer Cole?" she asked softly. Brandon looked up, tension still evident in his posture. "Yes, ma'am." "I just wanted to say, Thank you, she said quietly. For handling the procedures properly now. For showing respect. Brandon blinked, surprised. Her words weren't patronizing. They were simple acknowledgement. He nodded slowly. Thank you. I needed the reminder. She smiled faintly, stepping aside. Just remember, mistakes can happen. But you can also choose to fix them. Brandon's focus returned to the gate controls. Another vehicle approached. He didn't hesitate this time. He verified the ID, checked the name, ensured the badge matched the person before opening the gate smoothly. The car rolled through, and Brandon felt a small, quiet relief. It was a tiny victory, but in that moment, it carried significance. He was slowly learning what accountability looked like in action. Later that morning, Brandon was summoned to the chief judge's chambers again. This time, Hayes' assistant opened the door and gestured him inside. Brandon entered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Hayes looked up from his desk, calm as always, a stack of case files neatly arranged in front of him. There was no anger in his expression, only measured authority. Officer Cole, Hayes began, voice steady, you spent the morning reflecting on the incident. I hope you understand why your actions were dangerous. Yes, Your Honor, Brandon replied. His voice was firmer now, steadier. I understand. I see how assumptions almost created a serious situation. Hayes nodded once. Good. Let this morning be a lesson in more than procedure. Authority is not the power to judge others by appearance. It is the responsibility to follow rules, to ensure fairness, to protect everyone equally. Understand that? Yes, Your Honor, Brandon said, his gaze dropping slightly. He could feel the weight of the words deep in his chest, their significance impossible to ignore. Hayes leaned back slightly, studying him. I am not here to punish you publicly. That serves no purpose. But I am here to ensure you understand what it means to exercise authority correctly. If you cannot act without bias, you are a risk to yourself, to this building, to those who rely on your judgment. I understand, Brandon whispered. His voice was barely audible, but Hayes didn't need volume to convey impact. His calm authority spoke louder than any raised tone ever could. You'll continue with your bias training, Hayes continued. You'll review all procedures, and you will report to Lieutenant Reynolds regularly until he is satisfied that you fully understand the responsibilities of your role. Yes, Your Honor, Brandon said again. He felt smaller in stature, humbled, but also strangely determined. The morning had shaken him, but it had also sparked the first true understanding of what professionalism and respect required. Hayes nodded once more. Good. You may leave now. Remember, accountability is more than words, it is action. Every ID you scan, every interaction you have, every decision you make from this moment forward reflects whether you truly understand that. Brandon left the chambers slowly, footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Each step reminded him of the morning's mistakes and the lessons etched into his mind. He passed colleagues in the hall, who gave quiet nods or cautious glances. Some knew what had happened, some didn't. But Brandon didn't need their recognition. The lesson was his, personal, and undeniable. Outside, the courthouse lot had returned to normal rhythm. Cars rolled in, gates lifted without incident, and the quiet authority of Judge Hayes moved through the building undisturbed. Brandon stood at his post, scanning IDs with precision, professionalism, and an awareness he had never felt before. Each interaction reinforced the lesson. Fairness, procedure, and respect were not optional. They were mandatory. Hours passed. Brandon reviewed procedures multiple times, ensuring no step was skipped, no assumption left unchecked. The quiet hum of activity continued around him, but he remained hyper-focused. Every glance at a badge reminded him of Hayes' calm authority. Every verified name reinforced the weight of responsibility. Later, Alina Brooks approached again, holding a stack of documents. Officer Cole, She said gently, "Thank you. It's good to see you following the rules. The morning could have been disastrous, but you handled the rest correctly. That matters." Brandon nodded, finally allowing himself a small sense of relief. "Thank you. I needed the reminder." She smiled, stepping away. "Remember, accountability isn't punishment. It's understanding, learning, and doing better." As the day went on, Brandon continued his duties with newfound awareness. Each verified ID, each respectful interaction, each small decision became a reinforcement of the lesson from the morning. He no longer acted on assumption. He acted on procedure, fairness, and professionalism. Meanwhile, Judge Hayes presided over the courtroom with the same calm authority he had displayed all morning. The incident outside had not distracted him. He moved through his docket efficiently, quietly setting an example for everyone in the building. The courthouse hummed with order, respect, and procedure, the exact balance Brandon had disrupted earlier. By evening, Brandon had completed his report, undergone additional bias training, and reflected extensively on the events of the morning. He had faced the consequences, felt the weight of accountability, and learned the hard truth. Authority without fairness is hollow, assumptions are dangerous, and respect is non-negotiable. When the gates finally closed for the day, Brandon stepped back, taking a deep breath. The morning had started with tension, confrontation, and ego. It had ended with understanding, humility, and lessons etched in memory. He had been forced to see the consequences of assumptions and bias firsthand. Judge Hayes left the building quietly, unbothered by the incident. His calm presence lingered in the halls, in the echoes of steps on polished floors, in the routines of the courthouse staff. For Brandon, that calm authority would never leave his mind. It was a reminder that respect, procedure, and fairness are not abstract concepts. They are the pillars that hold everything together. And for anyone watching, reading, or listening to this story, the lesson is clear. Assumptions can destroy, bias can blind, and authority without fairness is meaningless. Sometimes, the smallest confrontations teach the biggest lessons.